Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we're continuing our series of Before the Patriarchs with 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 a new beginning. What happened after the flood? And and today we'll be comparing to so we can really kind of understand what changed. We're going to look at we're going to do a little comparison of before the flood versus post flood things are done differently, and how the world itself is indeed different. And we're going to begin here in Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have begotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground. In the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought forth the fruit of the ground, an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought forth the firstlings of his flock and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offerings. But unto Cain to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And if you remember, if you heard us talk about the seed of woman, this where Cain, Eve had thought God promised a seed. One was going to crush the head of that serpent, and she thought it was Cain, but proved not to be the case. In fact, something very different happened here. There's religion, such as it was at the time, was really very simple. There's no actual strict commandment that says to keep the Sabbath, but God did set it apart, and perhaps they did that, rest on the Sabbath day, and to make this whole burnt offering of an animal. And we'll talk about why that later, okay? Because those in the fat thereof, he's it's a, and you go reading the law, you find that's kind of an aspect of a whole burnt offering. So, but Cain was even though the whole world is vegetarian, he was like the first maybe radical vegetarian trying to force this, and he created his own religion. He left the presence of the Lord and had a off the God standard religion, which became very popular. Which became very popular. Well, and and then we saw in Genesis 4, verse 26, we read the following. We read the following: To him there is also born a son, he called his name Enos. And then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, Seth was Cain's brother as well, and his son, and began a revival of the religion that got set up this very simple religion, really, in terms of what people did, just rest on the Sabbath, perhaps, and make these whole burnt offerings. And there's no indication of how frequent that was, but whenever it was, we saw the lamb with Abel a moment ago. Perhaps it was during the lambing season in the spring, around the time of Passover, and perhaps that was it for the whole year. We just really don't know. We have no idea about the frequency at all. But it begins to be a revival where people are beginning to get back on the God standard. And if you hear me talk about the God standard, the God standard, I got that from one of these perverted alphabet LGBTQ plus demonstrators had a homemade signs that take us off the God standard, because that's what they really want, and that's what has been going on in the world before the flood. But you have a revival here. But revivals come and go. It goes back to like the parable of the sower. A lot of people receive the word at once with joy, but when trouble comes, they're drawn. And trouble comes, they're rooting themselves and they turn away, or They get drawn away by by the deceitfulness of riches and the like. And this is what goes on by the time here, the time of Noah. And well, we're gonna read here another important business about some things understood into this religion before the flood. And we read this in Genesis 7, verses 2 through 8. Of every clean beast you shall take unto you by sevens, the male and his female. The beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of the fowl also of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon all the face of the earth. For yet 7 days I will cause the rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance I have made I will destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all that God commanded him. And God was 600 years old when the flood of waters were upon the earth. And Noah went in his sons and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Now the clean beasts and the beasts that were not clean, and the fowls, everything that creeps upon the earth. And so there's something else. There's a couple of things worth noting here. That this revived religion, which was dwindles down to really just Noah and his family, the only ones left on the God standard. And as we shall see next week's lesson, there's they all had enough faith to get in the box. The word ark literally means box, but they didn't. But they didn't all have equal faith at all. They all have equal faith at all. But the part of that religion that was on the God standard, they already understood the difference between clean and unclean animals. Clean animals are animals set apart as suitable for sacrifice, where all the other animals, which are by default unclean, are not suitable for sacrifice. And we saw that, and we can see that they already understood this, that was part of this. And this is the first mention of it. This is about 600. This is around 656 years after Adam was formed out of 1600. I'm sorry, and 56 years after Adam was formed out of the dust. And there's no doubt there was some sort of passing this down, and Abel, we're not told, but Adam, without a doubt, was given instructions, that was passed to Abel, then to Seth, and Seth his son Enos, and down this line here, and a lot of people learned how to do this right, and they, got back off the God standard, as we said. And just you have a few, very few believers of what God has said left on earth here who are following His standard. And so this knowledge of clean, unclean was passed down as part of that. And also, I want you to notice, we brought this out. It's worth bringing it out again. Notice even the unclean animals by sevens, but notice it's the male and the female, the male with his female. So it wasn't like one bull and 6 heifers. It was 7 bulls and 7 heifers. So the male and his female, and notice his female goes with him, belongs, and even so, there was not even polygamy among the lions. Among the animals at this time. Every lion had a lioness, not a pride of lions, of lioness. And and the like. Okay, so this ideal of polygamy was totally contrary to the original design of God. And we acknowledge there's some cases in the law where it could be a situation where it could even be commanded to keep a man's brother's seed, a name alive in the earth. But by and large, it was not part of the original design, and even that part is only necessary because of a sinful world, kind of a compensation. But even the animals, it's worth noting, did not have polygamy before the flood. Now, and tied into that was another aspect about the ground and the earth itself. In Genesis 3:17, we read the following. And unto Adam he said, because you have hearkened the voice of your wife, and eaten of the tree which I command you, saying, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for your sake. You see, all the days of your life, we're told that thistles and thorns would come up. And they still come up today, but well, we'll discuss that in a moment. But it was like a constant fight against them. A constant fight against them, not like necessarily where a farmer today burns. Often people are going to turn a piece of land to farmland. First thing they do is they burn everything. They scorch the earth first, and then they, that gets, and that, the hope is to kill these weeds and thistles and stuff. There's, in the ground, and then plow it and etc. And really, you just have to deal with the small ones coming up, and what that kind of thing, and you can really keep it fairly clean without. But the idea here was it was coming up. It was a constant battle against these things, not just a maybe an annual period we had to get rid of a bunch, but like maybe even almost a daily thing where you're having to get rid of these things. They're choking everything out. So that that's part of how the world was before the flood, or became. And we talked about that when Paradise Lost. How when Paradise was lost, this happened. Now, in Genesis 5, verse 28 through 30, we read some hope about this. And Lamech lived 182 years, begat a son, and called his name Noah, saying, this same shall comfort our work and the toil of our hands, because of the ground which God has cursed. And Lamech lived after Noah 595 years, and begat sons and daughters. Remember, Lamech means powerful, not powerful in this world, in its system, because it's a little confused. Cain also had a line to start with Enoch, just Chanok in Hebrew means dedication, and ends with powerful, and the sons of him. Well, this line, they were powerful in the things of this world. The whole world system was built around Cain, as we saw. But this guy's powerful in the things of God. And notice how he speaks by the Spirit of God, that he's going to comfort us. Noah is Noah in Hebrew, and it literally means comfort. So, there's this prophecy, as it were, in his naming, just as Methuselah's name was a prophecy we looked at last week by Chanok, Enoch, and named his son, meaning when he had given a prophecy. We're told in James, I believe it's James, that at judgment that God was coming, and he names his son literally, when he dies, it will come. People have 969 years to repent. Well, so Lamech doesn't quite dies 5 years before Noah, before the flood here. But Noah's going to bring him comfort of he's prophesied in essence that his son's going to bring about into this curse of thorns and thistles, just growing this ridiculous exponentially quick rate, where it's a daily chore to get rid of them. You got to do it just to keep growing enough food to eke out a living. And that brings us to where we begin after the flood here. We know what Noah did once they all got off the ark and stuff, as we saw before. And here's what we read. And Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took of every clean beast, every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings upon the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor, and the Lord said unto his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. For the imaginative man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I've done. And while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold, heat and cold, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So notice first thing Noah does is now the only people on earth. They're all on the God standard at this point. You know, and he's doing this. And notice the burnt offerings again, whole burnt offerings. We saw the fat mentioned with Abel. You know, so this, put these together, and that's what you understand. These weren't like peace offerings where they would eat part of it or anything. These were just kill the animal, lay it out, burn it till it's ashes, basically. And the fat, is associated that sweet smell, favorite savor is associated with the fat we're told in the Torah. The visceral fat, belly fat that we're not to eat and eat. So because now the earth has only the whole earth is on the God standard. Noah has it's a new beginning. The ground is not cursed anymore. But that does not. But this sacrifice does not. Sin has not left the world, even though all the wicked have been destroyed off the face of the earth. There's still the problem of sin. No good thing lives in me. That's say my flesh, Shaul, the apostle Paul said. And it's still true. And there's still, in man's heart, still going to be evil from his youth. Now notice from his youth, okay. So the problem of inborn, indwelling sin is still there. These sacrifices were never meant to take away sin, but rather a covering, an act of faith. That seed of woman that we talked about in the seed of woman was coming, and indeed was coming. So now he's never gonna get rid of everything again. Get rid of every living thing again as he's done. And we talked about this when we talked about when there's a gap in your theory. The world, how the Bible never says the earth was created in 6 days, but it says it was made. And the Hebrew word's bara, a different word from the word for created. And it depends on the context. Other places translated repaired, rebuilt, and it's accurately so, restored. It depends on what occurred before it. And so this is not, but he's wiped everything out before. Hayato Huvahu, literally in Hebrew, Genesis 1:2, the earth became chaotic and uninhabited. And then let there be light, except, and there was darkness, and so on and so forth. So it happened once before, it happened again, but not a third time. And it's worth noting, while the earth remains, as long as we have this earth, and we still do, there's going to be periods of cold and hot. There's going to be periods of summer and winter. Day and night, seed time and harvest, okay? And people speak for a moment on this. When I was a youngster, a guy wrote a book in 1969. The winter of 1969-70 was brutal compared to the ones before. And a guy wrote a book in 1970 about warning us about the dangers of global freezing. And indeed, for the next decade, it was starkly colder. You know, I went out here in northeast Oklahoma. My uncle and went ice fishing. Now if you did that, try to cut. If you went out there and there's a little ice on there and try to cut off, you'd fall in and die. You'd fall in the ice and and risk death. But it was cold enough to do that. And all of our ponds froze over. We had to break them with ice so our cattle could drink. And I went ice skating and all this stuff. And then, and the worst ones were 79, 69, 70, and 79, 80 where I lived when I grew up. But in 1980, El Nino came to the rescue. I remember having my windows rolled down, no air conditioning in my cars. When windows rolled down in the 80s in February, which was typically during those previous years, often the worst month as far as snow went. Because global freezing, we went through a bit of a decade of extra cold weather, but it didn't last. And now the day the rage is global warming. And you do not worry about that. It will not last. And also, this whole idea of global implies something that's simply not true. It implies global means the whole earth. So they're implying that basically let's say every 50 miles, the grid covering the entire planet, they've been collecting weather information, temperature information globally. So you got the whole planet covered, and perhaps getting some sort of average temperature for the Earth every day by taking all these data points and collecting and averaging them. And they've been doing it long enough that say 1,000 years, so they can see if there's any kind of cycle. And of course, it's all nonsense. There's parts of the Earth right now today that we're still not collecting data from. And we certainly weren't able to do that, say, for 1,000-year cycle, because in the past there was a little ice age, as it was called, in Europe, and then like the year of in 1814, the year without a summer here in America, Thomas Jefferson wrote in his journal on July 4th, this pond was frozen over. But summer came the next year. Heat came, and overall the globe was probably equal, because that same when this started in Indonesia, more or less on the opposite side of the world, this massive volcano erupted and put out a lot of heat into the air, and it sort of shifted the Arctic air mass down south for longer than normal. But the globe overall was probably about the same temperature. So there's no need to worry about these things. It's the promise of God that heat and cold, these things happen. They're cyclical, but these cycles will go on, just like day and night's a cycle. Seed time's a harvest a cycle. Summer and winter are cycles. Cold and heat are cycles as well. And it will never end as long as this earth remains. Now we're talking. So we looked at how there's a revival of the religion, and the whole world's back to being only on the God standard in this new beginning, and how that brought about that curse, an end to that curse, where yes, there's still thorns and thistles, but they're not growing excessively like they were before. Now we do our next comparison to see what else changed, in this new beginning that came after the flood. In Genesis 1, verse 28 through 30, we read the following. God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree and the fruit which is the fruit of a tree, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree, yielding seed, you shall have for meat. And to every beast of the earth, to every fowl of the air, to every that creeps upon the earth, wherein there's life, I've given every green herb for meat, and it was so. And remember that word meat, King James, the meanings changed in English over time. It just meant food, not the flesh of animals. Okay. So so notice at the beginning, there's two things outstanding here. First, this commandment about having dominion, being fruitful, useful, fulfilling the purpose God made them for. He's talking to Adam and Eve here. To replenish the earth. And we talked about that. We talked before when we talked about there's a gap in your theory, how that word Phil said, well, that word just means fill. Well, again, depends on the context, depends on what happened before it. And we're going to see that same word's used again in a moment here. Okay. And so they got this, as it were, this prime directive God's given them to be fruitful in his purpose for them in the first place, to multiply, have children, to fill the earth with people, to subdue the earth. Even this in the Garden of Eden, this in the Garden of Eden, but it doesn't say the whole world was like the Garden of Eden. God planted that garden in Eden, remember? So the rest of the world's kind of be transformed to be like that. The Garden of Eden's kind of the practice area, as it were. And how everything was made for man's pleasure and man's to be over everything. Man was made for God's pleasure, but everything else was made for man's pleasure and for the human race's pleasure. Animals and plants, etc. Even the stars and the moon, the sun were made for our benefit. And ultimately, woman was made for man's pleasure, and we showed that before as well. She was to be his helper. So all is good here. All is good here. They have the abundant life, but the abundant life, as we mentioned before, subdue it indicates there's some sort of challenge to overcome. So you have that prime directive to the human race right there. And also the other thing worth bearing is notice how not just people and everything else on earth are vegetarians. So when they're making those sacrifices, they're burning the whole thing. There's no, as we already shown, as a burnt offering, a whole burnt offering, where they're just burning the whole thing. It's not a peace offering where they're sharing a meal with God, as it were. Now we're going to read. We're going to read where we, towards where we ended last week when we talked about the flood. The end of the flood here in Genesis 8:15 through 19. And God spoke unto Noah, saying, go forth the ark, your wife and your sons with you, and bring forth every living creature with you, with all flesh and fowl, the cattle, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. And every beast, every creeping thing, every fowl, whatsoever creeps upon the earth after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. So now what we see here. Remember, the word ark just means box. It wasn't a ship like you've traditionally seen or anything. It's the same, like Ark of the Covenant, which was a box. Okay. And the word more strictly means the word coffer, which is a box you put money into. So the box, so when they go out there, notice how that prime directive with respect to the animals is given again. They may be multiple, they may be fruitful, they may fulfill the purpose God made them for in the first place. They may breed abundantly. Well, that's going to be necessary to multiply upon the earth and repopulate the earth with animals. So they went out in pairs, but there's a change here. As part of this breeding abundantly, and because of the world had changed, it was no longer, you know, polygamy was necessary among many animals like lions and whatever, because the world is going to change in a way we'll talk about in a moment that made that necessary. Now we pick up in Genesis 9 verses 1, Genesis 9 verses 1 through 3, and we see the following. And God blessed Noah in his sons to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. And the fear of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and every fowl of the air, upon all that moves upon the earth, and upon all the fish of the sea. Into your hands they are delivered. Are they delivered? Everything that every moving thing that lives shall be meat for you, even as every green herb I've given for you. Notice here again. Remember that word meat means food. So first of all, notice again the prime directive is repeated, and that word replenish there is the same one we saw earlier. We saw, a few moments ago, the same Hebrew word. Well, did that mean fill the earth, or did it mean refill the earth? It meant refill the earth because the context is it had been filled before. And in the same way that one in Genesis 1:28 or thereabouts we're at, that also, depends on whether or not the earth's been filled before. And as we showed again my lesson, there's a gap in your theory how the earth was made, not created, in 6 days, and how it definitely had been filled with people before. It couldn't have became empty, and it couldn't have become chaotic and uninhabited without previously been inhabited. So now there's a change here. So it's a new beginning. I'm sorry, it's not a change. There's a new beginning, but there is a change. Remember the thing that have dominion over all the over every animal on earth and stuff. Now there's a change. The animals, apparently there was no fear of man before. Not apparently, it's obvious. There was no fear of man before, and there was no need for a fear of man before. People weren't, the only time they killed an animal was to sacrifice it, looking forward to that seed of woman that had been promised. Everything was vegans, and but now, not the case. People now need to eat meat, and the reason is it's nutritionally denser. To get the nutrition of a pound of hamburger, you have to eat rough, basically the equivalent of 10 pounds of alfalfa, and you can, in some stores, at least I've seen alfalfa, for sale. There's a lot of problems with that. One is alfalfa 10 pounds of alfalfa. You probably couldn't even eat it in the same amount of time you eat your stomach. You weren't made to digest that much, but even if you can manage that, it comes with a lot more calories. And your herbivores, your animals that only eat plants like cattle and stuff, tend to be fat. And that's what's going to happen to you if you go around eating a vegetarian diet, or particularly a vegan diet. Study after study has shown that they have more weight, and that they gain more weight because they're bringing in more calories. They're bringing more carbohydrates, more to the point. Because they have to, because it's not as nutritionally dense. The cows out there doing you a favor. It's condensing that nutrition, and particularly these clean animals like cattle, the 4-chamber stomach. They chew the cud. They're getting out all the impurities, and they're really condensing that nutrition, into their muscle, that we're in the muscle, the part you're supposed to eat. And it's necessary because the whole world has changed. And we'll talk about how it changed that made this necessary. But because of that, certain animals now also will not be able to get they're not built to do this. They will not be able to get enough nutrition from vegetation anymore. So now you have this problem of lions, for example, as I mentioned before, now are becoming meat eaters. And because the world's changed, because of this change, the fact is animals fight back. I watched the video where a pride of lions got desperate during a drought, and they decided to attack a water buffalo. The water buffalo, they managed to kill the water buffalo, but it killed one of the lions in the attack and injured another one so bad it died later from a Cape buffalo in South Africa. This is in South Africa, I guess, or in that area, the Cape buffalo. It was, but now what you end up with a disproportional ratio of male to female. And if you can have one male lion and say 10 females, and you can still repopulate the earth, and still multiply and repopulate, but you can't have 10 male lions and one female and do any good at all. All you'll do is have the males fighting all the time, and then you're still not going to end up with any more lion cubs. So the world changed, and because of that, the dread of man needs to be on them. And yes, there's cases where lions attack. In the Bible's full of them, and often God commanded them. But most of the cases in history, when a person is attacked by an animal, largely the animal feels afraid. The dread of man is cornered somehow. And feels like and has this fear in their instinct to fight to save their own lives kicks in. And that like rattlesnakes here in America. The reason why they rattle is they don't want to bite you. They bite people, from the snake's perspective as a last resort, because they need that venom for hunting. Without it, they can't get the food to survive. So the world is no longer the Great Commission. The prime directive has been re-given to the human race again. But the job of having dominion has changed, because now the animals, some are meat eaters and whatever, and some of them, and now the fear of them's got to be put in there, and some aren't even meat eaters, but like the Cape buffalo, they feel threatened. They feel threatened. They may attack or whatever. So that fear of man is now necessary. You're not gonna have just everything. Eve thought it was no strange thing. The snake, the serpent who had legs at the time, was talking to her. This was perhaps a not so abnormal experience, but now the world has changed. There's a new beginning, and the rules are different. Now in Genesis 4, verses 1 through 10, we're going to read again about another change that occurred that made everything different. And that's how that concerns murder and crime in general. And let's see what we see here in Genesis 4, verse 10 through 15. And he, that's God, said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the earth, and which has opened her mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. And when you till the ground, it shall not henceforth yield her strength. A fugitive vagabond you shall be in the earth." And Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me this day from the face of the earth, and from your face shall I be hid. Now I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth. It shall come to pass that everyone that finds me shall slay me." And the Lord said unto him, "Whosoever slays Cain's vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." The Lord set a mark upon Cain, and finding him, lest any finding him should kill him. So, as we discussed about in the days of Noah, it starts with the world gets in this mess. And it starts with Cain. He left the presence of the Lord, got off the God standard, and he didn't want to do things God's way. Had his own religion, tried to make his own way to get to God, not the way God said to get to him. And then he became a murderer. And notice that Cain has this sense of justice, that he deserves to be killed for killing his brother, and he's gonna be a fugitive and a vagabond, fugitive running from the law. We think of the day, of course, but there is no law. But the fugitive running from all who are trying to slay him to avenge Abel. And God says to the Lord, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yahweh, however Yahweh, if you want to go with the Cherokee pronunciation, however you like, says to him, he's going to put a mark on him, and so that no one will kill him. And why? I mean, Cain already had a sense that it was just that he died for killing his brother, because there was no law that said so. Sin exists in the world before the law, but the penalties didn't exist. So there was no penalty out there. So Cain starts this criminal lifestyle of wandering, and he actually becomes kind of popular, sort of a rock star, so to speak, of the day. The world starts following him. He builds the first city, among the descendants of Adam, and so on. And people name their children after him. And we're going to look at one of those here. Remember, his descendants, that list starts with Hanok, dedicated, Enoch, and ends with Lamech, powerful, dedicated to this off the God standard religion, dedicated to the ways of this world, and ending with powerful in this world and his descendants. And look what Lamech says. Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Hearken to my speech, for I've slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 70 and sevenfold. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare him a son, and called his name Seth. For God, she says, appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. So you got the first thing. There's a lot here, but the first thing we'll zero in on is Cain slew Abel. Everyone knows this. This is 5 generations after Cain. And notice the ideal here is God will keep people from avenging people for murder. And we looked at in the days of Noah, all this did was led to great violence, violence filling the earth. The mind of man's imagination was on evil continually. We just read that that's still the case. There's still this problem of indwelling sin, but there's no external penalty for this, for taking action on this indwelling sin here with Lamech. And also notice Lamech's the first to have 2 wives, polygamy. And even later on the ark, even the animals, that was not the case. God didn't make Adam and Eve and Jill or whoever. Just one man, one woman. That's the pattern that God originally had, and the pattern he even had for the animals. This ideal of having 2 wives, not from love but from lust, begins with this evil man Lamech. This powerful in the ways of this world. So, and he's powerful and thinks like the powerful often think they can get away with murder. but there's a change, but there's a new beginning when we get off when after the flood, and the rules about this are about to change or change, and we're going to see how here in Genesis 9, verses 4 through 7. But with flesh, but flesh the life there, which the blood you shall not eat. Surely the blood of your lives I'll require at the hand of every beast, I'll require at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother, I'll require the life of man. Whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. And you, be you fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth and multiply therein. So, now they're eating the flesh, right? We talked about that. You're not to eat the blood. And that, we talked about a while back. I had a lesson about 4 necessary things, cultural customs, if you will, not commandments of righteousness, but customs the Gentiles also have to keep. And one of them is not to eat blood. Well, some aren't just customs, because not having idolatry, not having, but the things that are absolutely necessary, and among them is not eating blood. That's still true for everyone. And why? Because the life is in the blood. Remember, there's the blood, the life there is the blood. And in fact, the Hebrew word for oxygen, kai, is the same Hebrew word for lives. Chaim, sometimes l'chaim. Often people say it plural all the time, l'chaim. But life, because oxygen is in the blood. If you smother someone, you've cut the oxygen off out of their blood, they die. If someone bleeds out, they die because the oxygen was carrying the blood. Oxygen is the power source of every cell in your body, and the blood is the transport system. You breathe it in, you breathe in air, your lungs get oxygen out and put it into the bloodstream. The blood carries it, and brings back carbon dioxide, which you breathe out. Which is made from from some of the oxygen. So now the penalty for murder is death. There's an end to lawlessness now. No more the sense of, it's just, I'm killed for doing it, for killing someone else, but you're actually going to be killed. And as we saw a minute ago, from man's youth has still got evil. He's still got this evil inclination, but now it's going to be reined in. And notice, at the hand of man, God's commandment here is that if someone kills someone, that we kill them. That we are to be his instrument in dealing out justice, for murder and for other such crimes, they'll be spelled out later when the Torah is given. But so be like, well, what right does man have to do this? No, God is your judge, and he's already judged that you are to die if you kill someone else, and he's already commissioned people to do to carry that out, along with other things such as adultery and homosexuality and other like heinous crimes that go against that go against this prime directive, which we end with: be fruitful and multiply and bring forth abundantly in the earth and therein. That's why homosexuality and like is such a heinous crime to God, because you cannot be fruitful. You cannot fulfill the purposes of God doing this, and you certainly cannot multiply through homosexuality or lesbianism or any of these other things. They're against the prime directive to reproduce, to produce children and fill the earth. So now there's law and order. There's not going to be no more just basically no one to answer to, every man just doing what's right in his own eyes. That's never worked well, never will. Now in Genesis 6, verse 17 through 18, we start looking at another thing that changed with this, how the world changed again and how things are going to be different with this new beginning. And here's what we're reading in Genesis 6, verse 17 through 18. Behold, even I do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under the heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with you I'll establish my covenant, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. So now, there's this flood's going to come, and as we talked about, like mist came up from the air. It had never rained. Instead, like one of them sprinkler systems on maybe a golf course out in the desert, where just mist is out of the ground, through a sprinkler system. We're like, it's that's how the whole earth was watered. It had never rained, and yet now, so rain is going to be something new that's coming. And the other thing that's outstanding in this part is he's going to establish a covenant. The first time a covenant was ever mentioned. There has been no covenant before, just a promise. And notice this covenant's conditional. He will establish it when? After the flood. And for them to, and their part is to build the ark, the box, put everything in it, and after the flood, come back out for a new beginning. And in Genesis 9, verse 8, we pick up Genesis 9, verse 8 through 11, and we start reading about this covenant that had been promised. And God said unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, with every living creature that is with you, of fowl, of the cattle, of every beast of the field that is with you, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you, and neither will all flesh be cut off any more by the floods or the waters of a flood. Neither shall there be any more floods to destroy the earth. As we pointed out here, this is 2 years. This is a year later. I mean, the whole time on the flood, there's no mention of God speaking to Noah. That's worth noting here again. But now notice he doesn't just speak to Noah, he speaks to his sons also. And notice this covenant's not just with Noah. It's with his seed after him. Well, all of us are descendants of Noah. We all got off the boat in Turkey together. Really, that's my expression. I really should say we all got off the box, and we all came out of the box in Turkey together. The whole human race here. And notice with the animals too. And there's another time when he's going to make yes, he made it with the wildlife. And we'll look at this covenant is here a little bit in a moment. But notice who the parties of the covenant are: the whole human race, not just Noah. Him and his descendants. That's everyone. And notice how they all hear from God, as I mentioned a moment ago. And this is the first time perhaps we've seen this occur. It's a new beginning. Everyone's on the God standard at this point. And all can hear from God. And all hear him. And he's back to like in the garden where he talked to Adam and Eve both. The whole human race is in contact with him in this new beginning. And what's the promise of this flood? That there's this covenant that there's not going to be another flood to destroy the earth. That's important. So that is, and that's why. So it's important for the wildlife. And again, God, the serpent talked, and God speaks to animals, and through animals like Balaam and the donkey, right? There's communication with God and animals. So this, is with them as well. And there's and there's going to be a sign to this covenant, a token, as we're going to see here in Genesis 9:12 through 17. And God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I shall make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass that when we bring the cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the water shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I'll look upon it, and I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the token which I've established of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth." The rainbow, that bow, and notice this is the first time the word clouds, are encountered here. Perhaps cloud, remember when the flood occurred, water came forth of the earth that, if you follow scientific journals and the like, you perhaps know about a year or so ago, I believe, if I remember right, they were using ground penetrating radar on the bottom of the ocean floor in the Marianas Trench or something very deep like that. I think it was the Marianas Trench though. And found that there's an ocean, as one science put, there's an ocean under the ocean. There's more water underground than above ground, which would be necessary for the flood that rose above, covered all the oceans plus all the land we got up above, 25 feet above the highest mountain. Okay. And they found there's sufficient water for that. Well, that's where but the main thing is it also came, there was the waters were separated. There's no mention of clouds. There was a canopy of water, and that canopy is gone. Now there's clouds. And perhaps those clouds first formed, as the flood started. When the rain began to come down, you get vapor, the whole world's changed. And when it rains, God's preventing mass panic from setting in. It's not another flood coming to kill off every living creature and every human being again. So he's making sure the animals as well as people understand this. And while we're talking about the rainbow, it's come to take it's been perverted to take a bad connotation. If you look on their Rainbow Coalition flags, they're not even in the right order. They're kind of messed up and perhaps backwards. The rainbow they have is even perverted. That's why I refer to it often as a perverted rainbow. It's not the right, not the actual natural order of colors in the rainbow. In the like that, and so it's so it's no, that's a sign of perversion, but this was a sign of the promise of God not to destroy the earth again with a flood. And and we know it's a natural phenomenon. Raindrops are little prisms creating that, but it didn't exist before because there was no rain before. You can have a rainbow without rain. It may not rain right where you're saying, but rain somewhere where you see that. Okay, or is. All right, now we're going to continue on here. We're going to look at some. We're continue on. We're kind of, that's where we're ending with the narrative in Genesis. But there's there's some life application here we need for our lives, and we're going to look at those here. And in Psalms 101, verse 5 through 9, we read the following: "Who laid the foundation of the earth, it should not be removed forever. You covered it with deep as a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the voice of your thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys of the place where you have founded for them. You have set a boundary they may not pass over, that they may not turn again to cover the earth." Okay, notice at the beginning here we talked about who laid the foundation of the earth. It should not be moved forever. And that was our very first thing we talked about, We covered just Genesis 1, verse 1, and why it's so controversial. The short version is, if God made everything, his universe, his rules, we all have to live by his rules. And rebellious man doesn't want to do that and invents all kinds of fanciful explanations other than God made it all. God created it all. So, but here the psalmist affirms that God indeed created all. The foundation of the earth at the beginning, and who covered the deep as with a garment. Cover the whole earth in water. And indeed, Noah's day also covered the whole earth within water. Now, his voice, at his rebuke, they fled. The voice thunder, and we saw this before when we talked about the flood. How God, sent in the story of the flood, he sent a wind, just like the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the deep, and then things began to change. This wind came, and the flooding stops. And then they haste away. And again, how this drainage system is here. You got, the whole earth was just totally, if the whole surface of the earth was flat, all of a single elevation, everything would be underwater, right? But the mountains and the valleys drain into the place which they were founded for them. They sink, the water sinks down into the earth and eventually reaches that ocean that's under the ocean, or perhaps it's set in there. That the ocean that's under the ocean I talked about, it's bound in there. It can't come out, or perhaps it comes out in just little parts that fill aquifers and the like. But it's bound. It's imprisoned, as it were, under the earth, so they can't cover the earth's surface again. So the promise of God there is true and certain. And that brings us to 2 Chronicles 6:14. 6 verse 14, I should say. And said, O Lord God of Israel, is no God like you in the earth, nor in the earth, which keeps covenant and shows mercy to your servants that walk before you with all their heart. So, first thing we know is God keeps his promises. But the other thing is he keeps his covenants. And, and we today, he's made a new beginning. Well, a new beginning with us of a new covenant, a renewal, literally, Brit Hadashah, a renewed covenant, literally. There's a renewed covenant he's made with us, a new beginning. And we can have confidence he's going to keep that covenant. All that entails that to live as Christ, to die as gain. If we're absent from the body, we are with Messiah. And that's far better. That's part of the covenant. We can have confidence that will happen because he's kept his covenant with the rainbow, that sign of the covenant, and how again it's never flooded, and how that sign is remind us that he keeps his covenants. And he shows mercy to his servants. Noah was his servant. God gave him instructions. Noah carried them out. That's what a servant does. They carry out the instructions they're given. And they walk before him with all their heart. And that's what Noah did. And that's what we're to do, to walk humbly with our God and walk before him with all our heart. And we can be confident if we do our part, he will do his part. He keeps covenants. And notice again, no God like you in heaven or earth. Back to Genesis 1:1. His universe, his rules. Now, and this brings us into something very focused. We need to focus in on here, something very important about Noah the man. It's brought out here in Ezekiel 14, verse 14. Though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they should deliver but their own souls for their righteousness, says the Lord God. Now, first of all, some outstanding thing. Notice that these three are singled out for righteousness above all other men at the time of Ezekiel. And, give it a little thought. Think about who's not on this list. Abraham, Moses, David for Bathsheba, very understandable reasons. Not even King Josiah, that king that God said was another king like him who did all that was followed God wholeheartedly and never strayed from it. And so, what's so outstanding about these three men that puts them on this list? Why is Noah? Because Noah, particularly, and remember, Noah lives 950 years. We saw this. He lived 950 years. Job, 210. Daniel lives the shortest, right? But Noah by far had to do this longer than anyone else. He kept himself pure in an impure world. Those 600 years leading up to the flood, Noah walked with God. I mean, we talk. It was 1,656 years, and in that time, by a modest growth rate, the Earth could have had 250,000,000 people, and perhaps a billion. A billion, a quarter. What about the 250,000,000? Let's go to the low end. 250,000,000 off the God standard, except for 8 people. And Noah's the one leading those 8 people. And Noah's the one who never wavered. And this is very important for us because people today, sometimes people have testimonies at church, at congregations where you meet on the Sabbath or on Sunday or some other day. And something, they'll talk about, someone will tell about how wicked they were and how God turned from wickedness to righteousness. Now the evangelism, and people are like, well, that's a powerful testimony. But the most powerful testimony in the people who haven't done such things, maybe people look upon them like, you got nothing, you got nothing compared to that. The truth is, they have the greatest testimony of all. God himself gave that this was the greatest testimony of all here to Ezekiel about Noah. These men, they kept themselves pure in an impure world. The greatest testimony is God, with the help of God and his Spirit, you never were squeezed into the mode of the world to begin with. It's not a testimony of deliverance. It's a testimony of preservation. And it far exceeds the testimony of deliverance. So if you're on that path, don't buy into this lie of the enemy, this lie of people often, that somehow you've got to go off and do wickedly, and the more wickedly you do, then return to God, the greater your testimony. No, you already have a greater testimony than them. And if you've done wickedly, the greatest testimony you can make from your life from now on is to never return to it. That's the testimony of Noah. But notice it only affects Noah, and that's what we're going to look at here now, a little further down Ezekiel 14 and verse 20. Though Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, as I live, says the Lord, they shall deliver neither sons nor daughters, they shall but deliver their own souls by their righteousness. There's a saying, God has no grandchildren. You can certainly, God, the Bible does allow a guaranteed method that your children will turn to God, and it doesn't promise they'll never go into sin, but they will come back. They will turn to him. If you'll raise in the way God says to. But you cannot have a relationship with God for them. They have to have their own. Our righteousness comes from God. Noah was never that. Noah never sinned, but Noah has his eyes fixed on that promised Savior that was promised to come, that Savior that's come, that we now look back and should have our eyes fixed on. And that's what, but their righteousness talking about they're doing what was right in God's eyes, not the righteousness of their sin being covered, but the righteousness of how they live their lives. And you cannot deliver someone, you cannot go to God and Noah couldn't. Think about it. He lived 950 years. I mean, he lived 600 years into that terrible system of, being virtually the only person on earth. How lonely that must have been. 100 years of preaching righteousness, trying to turn from this wickedness. Perhaps the flood could have been the judgment could have been delayed or even averted. They couldn't get anyone to do it, and so he's probably just mocked and whatever, huh? They kept through it. But he could not deliver his sons, and we don't know that Noah didn't have other children. I mean, probably did. And he couldn't deliver them by his righteousness. And we can be certain, we're told Lamech, his father, had other sons and daughters. None of Noah's brothers got on the boat. None of his sisters. None of his nieces, his nephews, from his grandfather Methuselah, none of his cousins except. His righteousness, doing what was right in God's eyes, could only bring deliverance to him through faith in what God's promise said. And his 3 sons and their wives who got on him also had to have their own faith to do so. And as we said, they all had to have faith in a certain amount of righteousness so you can even got in the ark to begin with, to help build it and got in there. But they're not all equal in that, and we'll see that in our next lesson next week. Now here's another, and here's another application for us today. Looking forward, as Noah looked forward to a judgment to come, so too have we a judgment to come that we need to be looking forward to and preparing for. And we read about this here in 2 Peter 3, verse 5 through 7. For this they're willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, and whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and earth which are now, the same are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment, the perdition of ungodly men. Now, the word of God tells us these things perished. And again, there's some argument over, does that mean the flood before Adam, or this is the flood of Noah? And really, it can apply to both. But remember, now there's this promise we have, this covenant. There's not this covenant that God's not going to destroy the earth with a flood again. But no, what it's going to do instead, he's going to destroy it with fire. Not just earth, by the way, the heavens. Notice plural. He's going to destroy all of it. The wickedness that goes on today is not going to continue forever. There's a day of judgment, and this perdition, eternal destruction is kind of the ideal, the term perdition, of ungodly men. The end, nobody's ever getting away with anything. And, so the world will not be destroyed by the flood again. We're going to be, destroyed, but that's still there and it can be remade. It's going to be completely wiped out by a fire, not just the earth, but the heavens as well. The stars in the sky and the sun, the moon, all of it's got to go. All of it is going to go. And we finish up here looking in Peter 3, verses 12 through 14, where he talks about how that's actually a good thing and how we're to prepare for it, because it's going to give us the ultimate new beginning. Looking again, 2 Peter 3, verses 12 through 14, looking forward to hastening unto the day of God, where the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nonetheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and new earth, wherein dwells righteousness. Wherefore, beloved, seeing you look for such things, be diligently found in him, in peace, without spot, and blameless. So that coming day of God, they're going to be dissolved. The elements melted. This is that Big Bang Theory in reverse, where it's all. I mean, everything is going to be destroyed, brought down to a subatomic level, as it were. The elements. I mean, elements are like your base atoms, oxygen, etc. Right? Those are like the elemental table, right? They're gonna be, they're gonna be, they're all gonna be broken down to this. Everything's gonna be totally destroyed to this, down to the subatomic level. But why? Not just for the sake of destruction, but so there can be a new heaven and new earth. And what's different about that? That this is a true new beginning wherein dwells only righteousness. Remember, today we looked earlier. Man still has sin in him. There's still sin in this world. Us as an individual, our flesh is not saved. Our bodies are not saved. Shaul, the apostle Paul said, there's no good thing that lives in me, dwells in me, that is to say, my flesh. The same's true for the rest of us. We still have that flesh, that sin nature from Adam. But we're going to be redeemed. And even the people who have natural bodies, that is going to be removed. There's going to be only righteousness as a true new beginning. And it's a new beginning we can experience today. We too can have a new beginning in Messiah. Because to go to that new heaven, new earth, to have part of that, to be in there, not be in the lake of fire, we have to do what? We got to be diligent, be found of him. Diligent requires something on our behalves. We need to be looking for such things, looking for this to come, and be hard at work doing our part. Just as Noah was hard at work at doing his part in building the ark and being consistent and persistent. So we found him in peace without spot and blameless, that pure, being pure in an impure world, as I talked about earlier. That's our part. And if we do that, we're going to have the ultimate new beginning. A world beyond that of when Messiah reigns, which we'll talk about in his future lesson, because we're not far from Yom Teruah, the feast of literally the feast of alarm, but often called the feast of trumpets. That begin our, and we talk about those feasts and the prophetic implications of them every year, and we'll be talking about them during Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. And that holiday within a holiday, the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles. And how these are all picturing these things to come, particularly that 8th day. We have a lot to look forward to. But like Noah, who became heir of the entire earth again, it all belonged to him, just like it all belonged to Adam before. He only became an heir. He only got that new beginning because he did what God required of him. And you must do the same thing. Jesus, Yeshua, however, whether you want to use English, Hebrew, or Aramaic, or, whatever your language is, Jesus if you're in Greek, and Jesus if you're in Spanish, however you like. He doesn't want to be a part of your life. He literally wants to run your life. He wants to be Lord of your life. He wants to take over. Your part is total surrender to him. If you don't do that, God will put his spirit in you so that you can do what you cannot do without the Spirit of God. Live a pure life in an impure world. That's all I've got for this week. Until next week, shalom.